Saint Luke, also known as Luke the Evangelist, is one of the four authors of the New Testament Gospels. He is traditionally believed to be a physician and a companion of Saint Paul. Saint Luke is credited with writing the Gospel of Luke and the Acts of the Apostles, which provides a two-part account of the life of Jesus and the early Christian church. The Gospel of Luke emphasizes compassion, forgiveness, and the inclusion of marginalized groups. In this series, Father Benoit Standaert unpacks the writings of Saint Luke, bringing to us a greater understanding of this evangelist and his writings. As we approach Advent, this series would be instrumental in our preparation for the Gospel according to Saint Luke.
Our hope is in the name of the Lord, who made heaven and earth. I would like to make a little development on something that has been discovered and analyzed by a few exegetes and gives us a more complete image of the church and the dynamics of church in Luke. We have already seen the importance of dealing and sharing everything inside the community. Well, this will come back in what I am developing now, but the symbol in the center of this short exposé is the table. The community of table. In all religious traditions, the table are delicate. Not everybody may sit, and not everybody is sitting on the same level of and the same nearby the main table or the center of the table. But it is very typical we eat together at the same table. It's a symbolic gesture, typical in the Gospel and in the Acts of the Apostles. Eating and having exchanges, deepening the sense of life. So we will see that in most narratives speaking about table, they do not just eat. Jesus and his friends go on reflecting on manners of life, on philosophical questions of any type of theological or spiritual reflection. This was classical at that time. We call that philosophical meals with music, with dance, and with talks. The most famous example is the Symposium of Plato with Socrates and his friends, each one making a speech on the beauty and on the high quality of virtue and the highest qualities in human experience. Well, especially in the 7 chapters from the end of 9 and the end of 16, we have Symposia Literatur, so is the expression in German. It's literature where sitting together at a table, they are discussing. It's a literary genre. Luther and Erasmus will pick that up and make new colloquia, discourses that were at the table. In the ancient times, in the 2nd century after Christ, we have Plutarchus, who has multiplied that type of symposia literature. Even in the Muslim tradition, I have at home a book in English of a translation of conversations with a master of the 16th century in India, a sheikh. He receives people And one of these people, after each conversation, took notes during several years with dates very precise. And the topics that the master was always ready to comment, develop, having in his mind the whole tradition and the sayings of this master and the saying of that master, and blessed are those masters who has given us such a new insight on that or that topic. So it's very interesting. We should perhaps do a little effort to invite people of associating around essential themes of our human experience together. Look, appreciate that, and give form of that in the Christian community. So, there are at least 7 meals where Jesus is present and where a discussion is developed. Only one of these 7 is in common with Matthew and Mark. And that is the vocation of Levi. In the Gospel of Matthew, he will receive the name of Matthew. But this Levi is a tax collector, and Jesus forces his hospitality, invites him to follow him, and afterwards that person, tax collector, will invite his colleagues, and there will be a common meal with those so-called sinners. And there we see Jesus at the table with the sinners. It's one of the first qualifying things in chapter 5 of Luke, verse 27 to 39. In chapter 7 is very famous at the end. The lady comes in and with her tears at the feet of Jesus, she washes his feet and she dries it with her hair, introduces parfum, and there he is sitting at the table as an invited guest by Simon, the head of the Pharisees of his city. And you see a complete scene that has not strictly the same configuration in the other synoptics. In chapter 11 again, Jesus is invited by Pharisees and comment the behavior of the one and the other. Chapter 14, again, 24 verses of chapter 14, he is at a table invited by the Pharisees. Chapter 15 is the opposite. He is at a table with sinners, with tax collectors, despised by the Pharisees who come across and remain outside, don't want to share the meal. And in the parables, we have the parable of the 2 sons, and the elder son doesn't want to enter, doesn't want to share the meal, doesn't want the communio, doesn't want the philosophy of the table. The father wants a feast, a total feast, and he refused to enter. And he, the son, refused to enter. And the narrative stops there with the last invitation. Should there not be, as a must, a feast? Because your brother, the other had said, your son. No, your brother was dead and his life was lost and he's fine back. And we don't know how the story finishes. Has the other son entered? And have the Pharisees accepted to enter? It's not probable. It is open. And there you see the talent of Luke. He ends in an open end. Dynamically, the story can continue in life. Will we be able to join the table with this son who came back after all what happened outside the country? There is still chapter 19, the famous passage at Jericho, where Jesus forces his hospitality to be the guest of Zacchaeus. A Dutch scholar, Wim Weren, has brought together all those elements and said, surprisingly, Jesus is present at all the meals. But not all are present at all the meals. Some refuse to be present. 3 times we see that Pharisees have critics about the behavior of Jesus and don't want to share the meal. So Jesus' disposition is extremely open, inclusive. And that is one of the hearts of his gospel, of his philosophy. And it's still the question, how open are the tables of our families for people from different level of society, different milieu and even race. In 1 year, how many do we receive? Also, as monastic community, we must still question ourselves. We have then, as the crown meal, the Last Supper. And at the end of that Last Supper, there's a whole discussion. Who is the most important? Even with the practical question, the one who is sitting at the table or the one who is serving? And there comes this Christological waitful idea. I am in the middle of you as the one who serves. So, again, it's a philosophical discussion. Who is the most important at a table? And there is a Christological solution. Christ is there where the servant treats up and gives his life for the other. Even inside the meal, he is the bread and the wine that is poured out, that is taken and given up for others. Even after his death, in the vision of Luke, the resurrection is proved by the meals. In Emmaus, to start, he takes the bread and breaks it. The gesture of breaking, referring to the gesture of Jesus at the Last Supper, expressing his given life to his disciples. They recognized him at breaking the bread. In all depth, a guest should never take the bread and break it. The gesture of Jesus is already revealing that he's not just a guest. He expresses that he is the father, the master of the house. It is the guest master who receives, who takes the bread and breaks it. He manifests his presence by taking up the role of the one who is master of the house, ready to give up his life for us. In the work of Luke itself, we have many passages, more than these 7 or 8 passages that I mentioned now. You know that after Emmaus, even in Jerusalem, they will force him, or he will provoke them and saying, give me something to eat, so that you can realize I am really here and not just a spoke, just an imaginary fiction. very impressive is all the passages where we have about table and eating and drinking. The table appears 15 times in Luke, only 5 and 4 times in Mark and Matthew. The verbs to eat and to drink comes back 9 times in Luke. And it's not because you have been eating and drinking in the presence of the Lord that you will enter in the following meal. I don't know you, you operators of evil. So eating and drinking is important, it's not enough. You should eat and drink with the typical conduct that is in line with the philosophy of the kingdom of God. Otherwise, you will not be recognized. Chapter 13, I don't know you. 2 times. Very terrible words at the last judgment when you try to enter, and that you argue, we have been eating and drinking in your presence. Not enough. Instead, in the verses that follow, there is an eschatological table, and where we see sitting Abraham, Isaac, the patriarchs, and all the prophets, and you will be pushed out. You see, the table is a very serious thing. In this life, inclusive, and in the other life, we can be excluded. Remember, Lazarus is laying on the bosom of Abraham at a table, sharing. And the other one, the rich one, is in a pit and in fire and would like to have a drop of water. Apparently, near Lazarus, there is some fresh water. He should just to put his finger there and try to join the rich one. But nothing is no more possible. After this life is finished, is the message of Abraham. I conclude with 3 remarks that a certain Daniel Marguerat, a French-speaking Swiss exegete, and who wrote a complete commentary on the Acts of the Apostles recently, and he has written also an article of the importance of the table in the vision of Luke. He also made a contrast between the first book, starts in the temple and in the heart of the temple, and finishes in the temple praying. But the Acts of the Apostles go from house to house to house until we arrive in some house where Paul is maintained, somehow prisoner, but in a house. So the difference of atmosphere and of anthropological context, we go from house to house and transmit the word, the light, the newness, the strength, the gospel of good news of the kingdom of God. From house to house, from table to table. I have in my memory a beautiful archaeological place in Philippi. When you come in Philippi, as it is written in the Acts, go a bit outside the city, higher up, and you see the water coming from the mountain. At a certain place today, there are 3 steps at one side of the water to get into the water, and then 3 steps to get out, and a bit further, a table. And here you have the symbols of Christian identity in Europe for the very first time. In the years 40, 50, the very beginning years of the Christian movement, when Paul crossed the Mediterranean and arrived in Europe. Water, 3 steps down, 3 steps out, to die with Christ and to be risen with Christ, and then to share the community life at the table. So, through these elements, you understand a little bit the importance of what modern exegesis has discovered in the difference of atmosphere between the first book and the last book of volume of Luke. Now, Margaret said there are 3 major themes in the way exposing the table and the community of table. First of all, Jesus receives those who are excluded in the margin, sinners and tax collectors. At least 3 passages are very explicit about that. 5:30, 7:34 and 51. And there is an inner opposition between the sinners and the just in this approach. Jesus will even in chapter 7 be considered as a sinner because he's not able to distinguish that this woman there is a manifest sinner in the city. So there is a strategy in the way of dealing with those questions by Jesus that is a real revolution in religious mind. Not every Christian, Jewish Christian in the beginning of the conversion to Christianity could follow the largeness of Jesus and of Paul. And on that level, both breathe absolutely the same spirit of openness. The second element that Margaret mentioned is the change of values. We find it already in the Magnificat of Mary. The rich go away with empty hands. The poor receive abundantly. The values are changed. God, the powerful, can humiliate those who have pretensions of all kinds and can elevate the humble, the poor. This 8 paralleled beatitudes and maledictions, or better, pity voices against those who are rich and satisfied and possess already everything. Chapter 6, verse 20 to 26, there you find this opposition. Blessed are the poor, even those with tears, even those who have nothing, but they will eschatologically receive a compensation. In all the symposium talks that we have in chapter 10 to 16 in Luke, and without any parallel in Matthew or Mark, this conversation insists constantly on the reverse, the change. Remember Lazarus and the rich. You have had your riches and he his poverty. Now the reality is changed. And the gospel is exactly the illustration that this change will happen soon or later. And then the last point is a consequence of the second, is that the people of God, the real ecclesia, the convoked people, has a new structure. The marginal come in the center and enter in the place of the most privileged one. And it is by this inversion that the kingdom of God is visible in our midst. Let us meditate on this sacrament of the table in the view already of Jesus, and picked up with care and depth by the evangelist Luke, making of it a kind of symbol where the identity of the inclusive community as Christians is visualized and dynamically exposed. Can we look in that mirror and consider then the way of life, the way of thinking in our own reality? Our hope is in the name of the Lord who made heaven and earth.
Saint Luke, also known as Luke the Evangelist, is one of the four authors of the New Testament Gospels. He is traditionally believed to be a physician and a companion of Saint Paul. Saint Luke is credited with writing the Gospel of Luke and the Acts of the Apostles, which provides a two-part account of the life of Jesus and the early Christian church. The Gospel of Luke emphasizes compassion, forgiveness, and the inclusion of marginalized groups. In this series, Father Benoit Standaert unpacks the writings of Saint Luke, bringing to us a greater understanding of this evangelist and his writings. As we approach Advent, this series would be instrumental in our preparation for the Gospel according to Saint Luke.